Assalamu alaikum and welcome to our second episode. So, in this episode, we are going to be focusing on the rights of the husband and wife in Islam. Now, we're going to be focusing on this concept a little different because I want to offer a different perspective. When it comes to knowing the rights of the husband and wife in Islam, it's extremely important to do your research. And there are plenty of resources on the internet. You can go ahead and search on YouTube and you'll find plenty of videos from scholars and teachers to explain exactly what those rights are. So if you're not familiar with them, go ahead and take the moment to do that. But oftentimes, there is an extreme focus on what our rights are. And just to highlight a few of the rights, there are kind of two different categories. There are rights that are mutual, meaning these are rights that both the husband and wife must participate in. For example, there is a basic and common right to respect and kindness. There is also the right to enjoying intercourse, something that we often assume is simply the right of a man and neglect to understand it is also the right of the wife in the relationship. When it comes to understanding rights, we have this focus on what our rights should be in a marriage, and that's extremely important. The reason it's so important is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just and He hates injustice. When we know the exact rights that we have, it's going to help us to ensure that there is no injustice being enacted upon us. In cases of abuse, it also allows us to have a very clear-cut definition of rights so that we're able to hold the unjust party accountable. It's something that we don't want to neglect, the fact that there are individuals who are in abusive marriages and their lack of knowledge about these rights or the manipulation of their understanding about these rights is a reason that that abuse is perpetuated. Outside of that, let's imagine you are in a stable and trying to make your marriage healthier. When it comes to thinking about the rights, obviously we are going to focus on what our rights are. But imagine if we focus just as heavily on the rights of our spouse. Now, this is this perspective that I want to offer. What if instead of just focusing on what our rights are, we focused on what the rights of our spouse are and how well we're fulfilling it? Imagine how much more healthy our marriages would be. Imagine how different our marriages would be or our relationships. Imagine how different communication would be. Imagine how much more exciting and fulfilling a marriage could be when we make that perspective shift. And now, it's extremely important to recognize that it's by human nature that we focus on what our rights are. When something is not being fulfilled and we expect it to be fulfilled, that causes a lot of agitation. And because of that, we are much more willing to take action or to assert ourselves in those circumstances. It's also human nature that if we're lapsing or we're not fulfilling the rights of another person, it's human nature to give ourselves a pass. It's human nature to overlook it or to think, hey, I'll worry about that tomorrow. Now, that seems like a double standard, and the reason is because it is. And sometimes our spouses will be so kind as to not even bring it up, but it's important that we bring it up for ourselves. Imagine if we had alarm bells going off when we weren't fulfilling the rights of our spouse in the same way that those alarm bells would be going off if they weren't fulfilling our rights. As you know, I love activities, so I have an activity to kind of help us assess how well we are fulfilling the rights of our spouse. So the first part of this activity is if you are not familiar with the rights of your spouse upon you, then to go ahead and take some moments to search what those rights are. Then on a piece of paper, go ahead and shorthand a list of those rights, whatever it might be. Respect, financial responsibility, just make a list in a way that you're going to understand what those rights are. Now, on that list, right next to each right, you're going to give yourself a score of 1 to 5. 1 being I'm doing a horrible job at fulfilling this right of my spouse. 5 being I'm doing an amazing job at fulfilling this right, and I could not get any better. So, if you have a score of 4 or 5 on any of the rights, then you don't need to worry about that. You can kind of put that to the side and worry about that later. If you have a score of 3 or below, I want you to make a star or some sort of mark, like highlighting or underlining those rights. Once you do that, I want you to go ahead and transfer that list with their scores to another paper. Once you do that, I want you to go ahead and start reflecting. What is the reason that you received the score that you did on these different rights? Knowledge is power when it comes to self-improvement. So our ability to be honest with ourselves and to actually assess what the reason is that's keeping us from fulfilling this right is going to help us to move towards a healthier and better marriage. Because ultimately, no matter how difficult the reason is, and we must admit that these reasons can be very difficult and emotional for us, your spouse still has a right to have their rights fulfilled. So go ahead and list the reasons. Could it be that perhaps you just weren't familiar with the fact that this was a right, so it was simply an error of ignorance? Could it be that maybe no one ever showed you how you were supposed to fulfill this right? Could it be that this is a sore spot in your marriage? It's a point of a lot of tension or argument, and so you guys tend to just leave it alone instead of try because you're afraid that it's going to cause conflict. Whatever the reason might be super honest about it and reflect on what are the ways that I can change this reason. I hope that this was helpful in changing your perspective on understanding the rights and helping you to move towards the concept of a healthier and happier marriage. Assalamu alaikum.